Okay, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome and thanks to whoever you are that has chosen to listen today. I'm glad you're here. And honestly, whether or not I was going to be able to be here today was in some question. I have taken sick with flu-like symptoms. Maybe it's the thing, I don't know. But I was down pretty bad yesterday. I'm feeling better today. Thanks to a couple of Tylenol, I've created a little window where I feel decent enough to do this. And my own symptoms aside, in general, it's been a rough couple of days in our house. My daughter had a couple of bad days, and that was after 4 weeks of really encouraging things. It seemed like things were going better and we were feeling positive. And then we just had a couple of days just now that felt like a backslide. And I know they say that the healing is not linear and it's not good to think of it like that, but it sure felt like it. So I've had kind of a 1-2 punch, and I'm barely here, but I'm glad to be here because, as I've said many times, doing the show and teaching my classes is really my saving grace these days. And I'm very happy to be bringing you today's talk with Shamini Jain. My friend Alma, shout out again to Alma. She's been sending me all these wonderful guest ideas. She sent me a link to a TED Talk that Shamini had done. And I think the reason she sent it to me, as you will hear, is the work that Shamini is doing is really in the intersection of so many conversations I've been having. And honestly, I didn't really expect that she would come on. It was a bit of a random invitation, but she did, and I was very grateful. So I wouldn't want anything to get in the way of bringing that to you today. Real quick, before we do go there, I don't want to forget to express my gratitude to our podcast premium subscribers. Today, in particular, I want to shout out Andrew Bauer and Stephanie Cockrell. Thanks, Andrew and Stephanie. We appreciate you. If you appreciate the show and you want to express your support for it, or you want to just get access to the full archives, becoming a podcast premium subscriber is the way to do it. Is choose your rate. You can cancel at any time. And if you don't have any money, all you have to do is email us and we will definitely give you a free account. But if you can afford to contribute even a little something, it definitely makes a difference. We are very grateful to the people out there who do that. If you want to learn more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber or find out about any of the stuff that I'm doing, whether it's my ongoing live stream classes, my weekly discussions that you're welcome to get in on, or I also have a bunch of on-demand video stuff, everything that I'm doing can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, we're going to keep this brief. I will touch base with you on the other side and give you a little bit of a check-in on Annabelle. I know a lot of you out there have emailed me asking how she is, and I'm happy to share some of that with you, even though we've had these bad couple days. In many respects, it's relevant to my conversation with Shamini today. So if you want to stick around to the other side, we'll check in then. But first, let's go ahead and listen to this conversation that I had with Shamini Jain. Hello? Are you there?
Hey there, I am here.
Hi, Shamini. I'm Jay. Nice to meet you.
Jay, nice to meet you too. I'm loving your yantra.
Well, it's funny. I used to have a picture of me there, and I didn't like that. We were just staring at a picture of me. I was like, let's give us something meditative to look at. So
Yeah, well, you can see mine, the same thing. I said I'd rather look at the goddess Narayani than my face.
exactly. Well, listen, I'm already recording, and I'd like to consider us having just begun, if that's okay with you.
That sounds great. I do have a hard stop at like 10 to the hour. I don't know how long you generally go, so.
Okay, that's good to know. I appreciate you letting me know.
Yeah.
10 to the hour. So we got 50 minutes is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
which should be good. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good for me to know because sometimes I'll drag us on longer than that. I'll try to keep us tight.
Okay.
So thank you so much for taking the invitation. Honestly, it felt like a little bit of a shot in the dark because we don't know each other at all. And it was really a listener of this show who, my friend Alma, shout out to Alma, who's been listening to me for a lot of years and is friends with me and knows some of the things that I'm into talking about. And then she was familiar with your work or heard something about your work and said, I think you should check Shamini out. And so I took a stab in the dark and here you are. Thank you so much for this.
Oh, you bet. It's my pleasure.
Well, just to give you a little bit of a context and then maybe anybody else listening, and just like maybe a starting point for us some too, I would share with you why I think my friend Alma thought I should reach out to you. Because she knows me from back when. We're just coming on the 7-year anniversary of this show.
Oh, congratulations.
And thank you. Well, when I started it, a lot of what it was about had to do with being a yoga teacher, like for a lot of years and having a yoga center in Brooklyn and having a lot of pain, physical pain that I just like wasn't admitting to. Like a lot of us were just like faking it because we're supposed to be these images of health, but we had completely run ourselves into the ground. And we were trying to keep up appearances, I think. And part of the show was just admitting to that. I'm in a lot of pain and I don't know what to do. And I invited pain science people on. And we had a whole conversation about the difference between a postural, structural, biomechanical model of the body and a biopsychosocial or sometimes biopsychosocial spiritual model of the body. And then I think there was actually a huge trend within yoga to look at the practices through like a more scientific lens. And I participated in some early discussions at the IYT when they were developing their standards. And a lot of us became very intrigued by thinking about the nervous system or vagal tone or finding these maybe ways of legitimizing transformative experiences we had through practice, I think, or legitimizing ourselves as professionals or something. And then, jump forward to more recent years where the whole industry fell apart with everything that's happened. And a lot of us, myself included, like the things that have helped me most personally in terms of my healing haven't been looking at my practices through a scientific lens, but much more like devotional and what would some people consider more like religious aspects, although I've never considered myself religious. And so then I've been having all these people on who were talking about consciousness-based reality in yoga teachings and different viewpoints within yoga on that. And then I was looking at people who were sort of bridging things. And I had people coming on to talk about Rupert Sheldrake and morphic resonance and energy fields. So all of that is maybe a little bit a long-winded way of saying if I Venn diagrammed a lot of these conversations out, you seem to fall in the intersection of a lot of these things.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that very much. You're definitely speaking, I think, the language that many of us have felt, where it's almost like we've almost had this error in our thinking that we've had to choose between our spiritual experiences and the scientific, exploration of them. And, absolutely, I think growing up as, a woman in the East Indian Jain tradition here in the southern United States, I was pretty aware of the split between, so-called split between science and spirituality. And as I really deepened my study into health and healing, I just realized that split really makes no sense. It doesn't make sense for us personally, and it doesn't make sense for us to address chronic problems like pain. And I love that you brought up pain because it's such a powerful example. You might know, for example, that we have come a long way in our exploration of yoga. And because, well, I would say the science is far from complete on yoga, and we can talk about that if you want. What we have done so far in terms of our scientific exploration, and I would call it that, it's an exploration, it's not a proving of anything. Because of that work that's been done, and because of the chronic pain epidemic that we have, we now know that the American College of Physicians, alongside other major groups, including Mayo Clinic and others, now recommend yoga as well as other holistic practices as first-line treatments for chronic pain. So finally, we're coming to a place where we can recognize that we can look at the biopsychosocial spiritual model, and we can look at the postural aspects. They all interconnect. And so, I love the way that you frame this as these interlocking Venn diagrams. The closer and closer we look at the overlaps of what science is showing us through the exploration of data, and what sages and masters of yoga have been telling us for millennia. I mean, first of all, how powerful this practice is, on all levels, and how it may actually, from my point of view as, founding executive director of a nonprofit called Consciousness and Healing Initiative, where our focus really is to help bring together the wisdom across healing practices and healing science and, educators and even artists to lead humanity to heal ourselves. How powerful this practice is to help solve our personal, health struggles as well as the global health crisis, because, we this is pretty significant what we're dealing with, whether it's chronic pain, whether it's mental health, whether it's chronic disease. We've known from these ancient traditions that these are, not only preventative health practices, these practices and all of the practices contained within yoga, the whole path of yoga is so incredibly helpful to us at every stage of our life and every stage of our healing journey. So I'll just stop there. I mean, we'll go wherever you want.
You could keep going, but here what I would add to it is that it seems to me one of the things I've come up against, not against, I shouldn't frame it that way. It's not up against. It's just that I've become aware of is that there are some folks who talk about science in the way that you're talking about it as this exploratory thing that is not necessarily at odds in any way with some of the things that yogic masters have taught. But there's also within science more what would I call it, a reductionist, like materialist viewpoint. And that's come up in recent conversations I had with people where I would ask yoga teachers about the idea of a soul or spirit, because it's sort of been like a taboo topic. And I was curious, and it was interesting to me to meet a lot of yoga teachers who do sort of hold a more materialist view. And it seems to me in bridging these things, there's a difference of worldview from like east to west sometimes, where the West doesn't even always acknowledge as true what is the basis of reality in the East. Like consciousness is just emergent and they leave it at that, as opposed to the source of all healing and flow of energy and whatnot. So it seems to me that there is sort of a bridge that has to be made between those worldviews, isn't there?
Absolutely. And you hit on some really key points here. First of all, science, as we know, it's a language, right? Just like spirituality, religion are languages. Languages for what? To, try to understand the reality around us, describe it, and in science's case, often predict it, right? So there is nothing about science that is inherently reductionist. Okay. And I'm going to say that again because I think it's important for us to remember this. There is nothing about science that is inherently reductionist. Science is like everything, is informed by culture. And so the culture of reductionism has been driving science for a long time. And Jay, it's evolving, right? So let's think about this. Let's just a quick example of our evolution in science and the way that we're moving past reductionism as a sole viewpoint of how to do science, how to think about science, even the kinds of studies that we do. 60 years ago, if I said your emotions affect your health as a PhD, researcher and clinical psychologist, I would have been laughed at, right? 60 years ago, if I said, I think that the immune system is connected to the brain, I would have been laughed at, right? Why? Because we had this erroneous sort of limited view that the body is a bunch of parts and pieces. They're different organ systems that don't really talk to each other. For God's sake, 60 years ago, we didn't know that the immune system was connected to the brain. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now what has happened, because we've started expanding our view of the body in a way that is more resonant with the way that indigenous medical systems, which, of course, yoga is a part of that, came from. We recognize that there are these deep interconnections within the body. We know that the immune system is connected to the brain. We know the hormone system is connected in with those systems as well. We know that our emotions affect our health, and we're beginning to explore. And I will say, I'm happy now to see that over the last couple of decades, even in research and meditation, people are finally feeling comfortable to say, we don't have to take a reductionist view in science to explore that. Now, they still use their fancy terms and their jargon. So I had a wonderful conversation with a fellow researcher, Dave Vago, who likes to talk about mindfulness practices, for example, as a set of practices. So hooray, first of all, mindfulness is a set of practices. Lovely for people to be saying that influence different aspects of our being, including self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-transcendence. Okay, so here are some of the jargony terms that some scientists are now starting to use when we're looking at contemplative practices, which include yoga. This aspect of what they call self-transcendence, the coming into oneness, and the experience of coming into oneness. What might that mean for our health? They're finally going there, and they have to use their own terms to do it, right? Because nobody wants to still say soul, spirit, God, consciousness, Atman, Brahman, whatever. Okay, so they have their own.
Even in the yoga world, we're afraid to use the word God. It's a thing.
It's a thing. So, But the good news is, when we talk about science, we can recognize that there's so many ways to explore the transcendent, even with scientific language. And this is really more about people, every one of us, coming out of the closet about our spiritual lives.
Yeah.
It's really what it's about. And everyone I talk to, because of the nature of the work that I do, at the Consciousness and Healing Initiative, obviously I'm kind of out of the closet, right, with how I see it and how I view science. And so I'll have people come to me and say, I had this incredible spiritual experience, big CEOs, entrepreneurs, hardcore neuroscience researchers, all these people. And my reflection is, why did we ever feel like we couldn't talk about our spiritual lives and be scientists at the same time? I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, isn't there an idea, and I've been talking about this a lot around the concept of animism too, because there seems like there was a point in the history of our evolution or whatever, where certain aspects of how we related to the forces of nature or animate forces of the world were become superstitious or something, because now we have science and reason, and we have a way of controlling and understanding the universe in ways that those primitive peoples did not. I don't subscribe to that view, because I think we've lost a valuable connection that you seem to be pointing at too. Yeah. I guess where I'm going in my mind is just to use some of the fancy terminologies that I've heard you use, is what you're describing the difference between what do you call it, pathogenesis and salutagenesis. I'd like my people listening to know because that seems to me what you just articulated. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. So let's get into that. And I get into all of this in my book. So my book is called Healing Ourselves, Biofield Science and the Future of Health. It was released by Sounds True Publications last fall, and I'm pleased to share that I just won a Nautilus Award. So that's
congratulations.
A big honor. Thank you. And so the book is really comprehensive and covers a lot of what we're discussing here in terms of what has our worldview been on consciousness, and how does our worldview of consciousness affect the healing process. So going back to our discussions about reductionism and this idea of pathogenesis, Now, while reductionism doesn't necessarily mean just a focus on disease, that's kind of the way things have gone. And for good reason, as you pointed out, Jay. Okay, at some point, we had diseases and we couldn't quite figure out what to do. And just ascribing them to spirits or spiritual influence wasn't really solving the problem. Okay, that was the truth. And we had, for example, the discovery of antibiotics, which helped save many lives. And, voila, it was like, wow, okay, there's something called a germ. And then we started conceiving the idea that the germ was outside of me, because if I take this outside agent called an antibiotic, I kill the germ and I feel better. That's great. That there's a place for that. It was wonderful. But as you know, sometimes with humans, it's like, every time we have a hammer, we think everything is a nail. And that was the problem. It's like, oh, well, now, this is true. And now this is no longer true. And that's been an issue. This has to do with, and I talk about this in my book too, this has to do with the idea of Occam's razor in science, right? The law of parsimony, that we're going to look for the least convoluted and the least complex explanation that accounts for most of the data. And even if there's some other parts that could predict what we're seeing here, we're going to kind of ignore or discount them because it's just too complex. And obviously, we don't want to necessarily change the laws of science unless there's really good reason to. Science is all about disproving stuff, right? It's not about proving stuff. But if you go back to yoga and you go back to all of these, literally in every culture around the world, the indigenous forms of medicine, and I will call it that. They were medicine. They were indigenous forms of medicine. Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, Tibetan medicine, Native medicine, African medicine were all based in principles of first-person understanding in the spiritual sense that guided, the way that they explored health. And health was always, based on what we call in Western science, a salutogenic model. That is, that we looked for where the harmonies were and where the disharmonies were. So health wasn't just about the absence of disease or getting rid of something that was outside of us, but it was understanding that if we were suffering from some kind of disharmony in our bodies, mind, even our environments, our relationships, we had to take a broader view because we understand that we're just part of a larger C, big C consciousness, as I call it, right? So where are we aligned with that big C consciousness and its reflection in everything around us and in us? And where are we not aligned? That's the salutogenic model, right? That's looking at the whole picture, not just this tiny little pathway of a chemical, pathway in our body and assuming that's going to, just working on that one little pathway is going to fix everything. Okay, first of all, we know that's not even true. There's a reason why we have off-label uses for drugs, right? A drug is developed for one thing and then all of a sudden we find out it's good for something else. Why? Because we have pleiotropic pathways in the body. That is, even, the chemicals in our body do different things and they affect different pathways. So there's no such thing as just attacking one single pathway to stimulate even a curing response, let alone a healing response. And so now we're looking at things like systems biology, where we're taking a larger view of the body. We're looking at patterns of metabolites or patterns of proteins in the body. And what's interesting? There have been studies by colleagues in Europe mostly that look at the alignment of systems biology, say, the pattern of our metabolites in the body, and they can actually link those to pattern formations in Chinese medicine and even Ayurveda, doshas, for example. So we're starting to see the linkages. And when we start to see the linkages, because we're taking a broader view of the mind body and we're understanding that it's really about pathways toward harmony and disharmony, then, everything changes, right? And all of a sudden we have so much power because we start recognizing all the pathways to change. I can change my diet. I can change my posture. I can really take a deep look at my relationships. I can take a look at whether I'm able to foster time, energy, and harmony with the earth around me, what's happening in the seasons, all these things that were taught to us by millennia. It's not that they weren't scientific. They were incredibly scientific. They just took a broader view.
Yeah, I think that this broader view is something that a lot of us have been coming to. I know that, when you were talking about this more pathogenetic way of thinking of things, and this idea of it kind of coming down to biochemistry, I know for myself, and I've heard you speak about this, we had conversations on the show around placebo as well. And it's so interesting to hear people sometimes when they mention placebo effect as though it like disproves things, when I think it sort of proves things about how we heal. And in particular, I've heard you spoke about the placebo surgeries. And I remember hearing about that years ago. And whenever I tell people about that, they've never heard about that before, and it blows their minds. Maybe you could legitimize it for me, because I'm not a doctor. And so when I say it and I say, I heard about this, they're like, oh yeah, you probably saw some YouTube video or something. And I'm like, no, there's actual research on this. So can you back me up on what they found from these placebo surgeries?
You bet. And I have a whole chapter in my book devoted to placebo, and I actually have a reframe of it, because if we really look at the data, then we realize the reason why this seems so mind-blowing is because we have been thinking of placebo from a reductionist model. The idea that placebo is meaningless, that placebo doesn't have real effects, that placebo is only meant to please the patient and doesn't actually affect them physically or really emotionally, except to just appease them, reduce their anxiety. Okay, so when we first started thinking about placebo, first of all, historically, we didn't really understand the mind-body connection. That's the truth. So when we look at placebo effects, in order for us to grok that this is really happening, we have to understand that placebo is telling us how powerful the mind-body connection is. It's really that simple. So in my chapter, I go over the effects that we've seen for placebo, not only in depression, in antidepressants, but in Parkinson's disease, where we're seeing placebo effects down to the neural firing level. And look, I get in really deep in my book. I have over 700 peer-reviewed published references for all those science geeks out there. I also have a whole practical part of the book too, which we can talk about. That's all, kind of what do I do with all this information? So it's called the Healing Keys, and I teach out of that as well, often at retreat centers. But these findings in placebo extend to depression, neural firing. For example, in Parkinson's, we can actually see these effects down to the neural firing levels, meaning that this idea that it's not real or it doesn't affect our body is completely false. And that's why when we see these systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials, dozens of them. So what are systematic reviews for people who don't know? We take not just one study, but we take all the studies in a particular area. In this case, all the studies that have been done with surgery where there has been a so-called placebo arm. What is a placebo arm? These are people who are randomized to a so-called placebo surgery group, and they're told that they're gonna get a surgery, and they may actually even get anesthesia and even an incision. So they really feel like they got the surgery, and they're not told until the end of the study whether they really got it or whether they got the quote sham or placebo surgery. So as far as they're concerned, they know they're part of the study and they might be randomized to one of the groups, but they don't know which one, right? And they're kind of led to believe that they are getting the surgery the whole time. What they found when they compiled the data across dozens and dozens of randomized controlled trials is that in most cases of surgery, there is a profoundly large placebo effect. In some cases, it's indistinguishable in terms of ratings of functional activity or pain, whether they were in the real surgery or sham surgery. Now, in the case of classic surgery, like rods and things like that in the body, you don't see this effect. I want to make this clear. It doesn't happen for everyone all the time, and it doesn't happen in all cases. But in the case of bariatric surgery, other types of, many different kinds of surgery, you see this effect. So why does this seem so unbelievable? It seems unbelievable to us because we think placebo isn't related to the mind-body connection. But when we understand that our mindset, our emotions, our relationships all affect us physiologically, and when we realize that these are all key ingredients of healing, then the whole thing flips on its head, and it's not an either or, it's a both and. So we may, whether we're going for a massage or acupuncture or surgery or taking a drug, that's part of the effect. But it's not at all of the effect. And honestly, most of the effect are coming from what we call these key healing ingredients. And what are those? When we look at placebo and we frame it from that way, what we've learned is what I call placebo equals heal. That's the name of the chapter in my book. And heal means holistic elements that activate life force. Now, for scientists who don't like the term life force, you can say holistic elements that activate salutagenesis or health promoting effects, right? Because that's what these are. And so we know this. The data is very clear on it. What are those ingredients? What are those key ingredients that we can use today for our self-healing? Expectation, which is our conscious mind. Do I believe in my conscious mind that this therapy or this situation, whatever it is going to help? Conditioning. Conditioning is kind of like learning. So it involves both the conscious and the subconscious mind. And it's about experience. It's kind of, it's about conditioning. So the last time I laid on a massage table, what happened? Did I feel good? Did I feel relaxed? Okay, if I did, then the chances are the next time I get on that massage table, my body's automatically going to go into a state of relaxation because it expects that, right? So it's a subconscious body-mind learning. So that's conditioning. Then there's relationship. So many studies showing that our relationship with our providers will actually affect our immunity. There's studies with the common cold. There's studies with all kinds of things showing that just how our practitioner interacts with us and whether we feel like they believe that we're going to get better is going to impact us all the way down to our immunity. And there's ritual. Ritual is in every single therapeutic encounter. We are doing rituals with ourselves every day. If it's our alarms waking us up at 6 a.m. and us saying, oh shit, every morning, that's a ritual. Okay. Mm-hmm. If it's the sun rising and us getting up and just saying a prayer as soon as we have our feet, down off the bed, that's a ritual. Everything we do affects our health in terms of rituals. And rituals, in the spiritual sense, are meant for us to open beyond a sense of the conditioned mind, open to spirit, open to guidance, and allow them to facilitate our healing, in the case of healing, or facilitate the next part of our life, right? Whatever we're going to do next. So engaging in rituals and creating our own healing ritual, and I give some guidance on how to do this in my book, is an incredibly powerful way to augment the self-healing. So when we look at placebo from all of these scientific studies, if we really look deeply at the data and we realize that placebo is actually better understood from a consciousness-based point of view rather than a reductionist model, then placebo actually begins to make sense. And I'll just, because I'm a data nerd, I want to share this for any listeners that are really interested in this area. We've all been led to believe that placebo means you've been tricked or you've been duped, but the latest studies from our colleagues at Harvard University, they're really doing the most in the open label placebo world. They're doing studies where they're actually giving patients placebos and telling them they're placebos. So here there's no trickery involved, right? They're actually saying, you're in the placebo group, I'm giving you a placebo pill. And the reason I'm doing this is because studies show that placebo effects are powerful mind-body effects. So it is possible that by taking just this placebo pill, you will get better. So what are they doing? They're setting a potential for an expectation that the people are going to get better because they're taking a placebo. And guess what? They've already published several studies.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.